Hello, good evening, and welcome to Face the Nation. As was evidenced by the voting patterns at the concluded presidential election, the country is deeply polarized politically, ethnically as well. And within this sort of climate of divisive politics, we thought we'd explore on today's show the opportunities for finding common ground. And that is the title of that is the topic of our show tonight. Divisive politics, finding common ground. And to see if there is any common ground amongst them at least, we've put together a panel of young activists from each of the different political camps, or the mainstream political camps, let's say, to sort of pick their brains, to see what they think. Moving forward, what are the areas that they can work together on? What are the areas that they would like to work together on, and where can they make compromises to ensure that there is political stability in the country, which could lead to economic stability as well. Let's quickly introduce our panelists to you. We have Rasika Jayakodi, journalist and UNP political activist, political commentator.
Former journalist, Nadim.
Former journalist, political commentator and UNP political activist. We also have Dr. Atul Samarkon, lecturer at the Open University of Sri Lanka, is also the convener of the Purawasi Handa organization, or Voice of the People, which, if I'm not mistaken, supported the candidacy of Mr. Anurukumara Disanayaka at the presidential election.
No, we supported actually Sajith Premadasa's candidature. Okay. Actually, not that we supported any candidate, but we forewarned that the democracy is going to be facing
the main
problems.
So, in which case, supported democracy.
Democracy.
Okay. We're also expecting to be joined later on by Mr. Milinda Rajapaksa, Colombo Municipal Councillor from the Sri Lanka Potujana Peramuna. I'm also joined on this side of the divide by Deshan Gonawala. So let's dive straight into things. Rasika, I'd like to start with you. The UNP appears to be in some sort of strife at the moment. We saw the party coming together, or in some form coming together, ahead of the presidential election. You were one of those who were advocating for a different candidate at the time. If I'm not mistaken, you preferred the candidacy of Mr. Karu Jayasuriya, the Speaker of Parliament. But once the candidate was announced, you also sort of put your back into it and got behind Mr. Sajith Premadasa. What is your take on the current political climate? Before we get on to divisive politics at the national level, how would you start addressing divisive politics within the United National Party?
Yes, Nadim, the outcome of the recently held presidential election was rather unexpected. I mean, we thought it would be we assumed it would be a very close contest, but in the end, the winner of the presidential election actually won with a resounding margin of 1.4 million votes. So after a result of that nature, understandably, there are various opinions within the UNP camp as to what our way forward should be. So in that context, there are several thought processes, and a lot of people, I think the majority of people within the camp, especially within the parliamentary group, are now claiming that our presidential candidate, Mr. Sajith Premadasa, should be given the party leadership, and he should be named the prime ministerial candidate of the party at the upcoming parliamentary election. I think everyone is of the view that there has to be a comprehensive change in the UNP, especially with the outcome of the presidential election. And the large majority of people believe that there has to be a change at the topmost tier of the party, which is the party leadership. And even the General Secretary of the party, Mr. Akhil Viraj Karyawasam, said at a press conference that former Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe would retire from politics soon. So in that context,
what's the sense among the young activists of the party? Let's say you have the various the youth front, the young professionals organization, various other sort of UNP affiliated groups. What's the feeling there among the party activists, let's say?
I think almost every one of them are pushing for change at all levels, not only at the leadership level, but also the organizational structure of the party, electorate organizers. I mean, if you analyze the results of the election, you can see so many underperforming electorate organizers who haven't done their job at the election. So there has to be a comprehensive change at all levels. That's the general sentiment among like every UNP member or every young member whom I deal with within the UNP. But there are different opinions on at which point this change has to happen. If there's change at the leadership level, at which point should it happen? Should it happen before the election? Should it happen immediately? Should it happen just before the election, parliamentary election, or should it happen after the parliamentary election, so that there's a 5-year period for the new leader to build up the party? So those are the three different like main opinions within the party as to how this change should take place.
Don't you feel that a failure to change before the general election could seriously hamper whatever chance is there, whatever minimal chance is there for the UNP to perform well at the parliamentary elections?
If there's change before the election.
If you fail to change before the election,
yes,
won't
I think
it hinder your
I
chances
personally believe that if there's going to be a change has to happen now. Because that's the essential nature of change. It should happen now, not tomorrow, not day after, not next week. Because then the new person, whoever coming into the party leadership with the, with a consensus, will have enough time to strategize for the parliamentary election, to devise plans, to see, how we can reorganize the party. So the incoming leader will have enough time. I mean, 4 months is not a long time in politics, but still he can, initiate certain changes just before the election. I think that's a positive. Any change should happen immediately, and that's the nature of meaningful change.
Mr. Jayakodi,
before we go to Dr. Samrakund, Deshan.
I want to ask you this question because you've seen, like, you're talking about change, you're talking about reform in terms of leadership, you're talking about new faces. But, I mean, if you look over the last few days at what has happened within the United National Party, immediately after the election, I think they arranged, Nadim, if I'm not mistaken, a meet and greet for the candidate. That was supposed to happen at Sirikota. Suddenly, the media were notified that no, the meet and greet is not happening at Sirikota, it's happening at Vauxhall Street. The same way you mentioned youth groups, young people, now pro-Sajith Premadasa and pro-Mr. Premadasa-led party. But just last week at Sirikota, led by a prominent politician's son, the son of a prominent politician from the Puttalam district, you had a press conference with a youth university student front with Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe seated there. Kind of cheering them on. Has the party really decided, or are they still at loggerheads? Because don't forget, there is also, like yourself, like you were before the election, a set of people that feel Karu Jayasuriya is a better leader moving forward.
No, at that point, in the case of Mr. Karu Jayasuriya, Deshan, what we said at that point was that, at that point the party was sharply divided over who the candidate should be. And one group was strongly pushing for Mr. Premadasa's candidacy, and another group was pushing for Mr. Wickramasinghe's candidacy. And in that context, we thought, there was a need for a compromise candidate who will hold the party together. Because at that point, it seemed like the UNP would be divided before the election. So the most important thing was to avoid the split in the party. I mean, so that was the thought process behind Mr. Jayasuriya's matter. But in the end, when Mr. Premadasa his name was proposed at the working committee meeting, everyone unanimously supported his candidate. So there was no question of going for another option.
Just last week.
Yes. So now, if you look at what happened in the UPFA soon after the presidential election in 2015, you will see this is the nature of Sri Lankan politics. I mean, like a group of sizable proportion of working central committee members of the UPFA, they aligned with Mr. Sirisena, who contested from the other side, from the UNP-led front. So similarly, after a defeat of this magnitude, there are various groups who have various opinions as to what the way forward should be. I mean, the outcome of the election was, it was a landslide defeat. If you leave out the 1.4 million votes that that came from the north and east provinces, we can't be satisfied about the way we performed in other parts of the country. So after this result of that magnitude, it's natural for various groups to have diverse opinions on who the next leader should be. I think that's the nature of this, this game. So in the end, I think what we should look at is to come, to make sure that everyone is on the same page once a decision is made. So right now we are struggling. I mean, all these groups are trying very hard to come to a final conclusion as to who the new leader should be and what's the transition plan.
Right.
So that's where it stands right now.
Dr. Athulasiri Samarakon, you mentioned as the convener for the Puravasi Handa group, you said that you eventually backed the candidacy of Mr. Sajid Premadasa at the 2019 presidential election.
Yeah.
We've got a new president now, Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who has promised certain reforms. He's started work now, more than a month, or just over a month into his term. What is your feeling? Because when we opened the show, you said that you supported Mr. Sajid Premadasa because it was between democracy and, I'm guessing, authoritarianism. Do you feel that democratic norms are being upheld now?
Yeah, that is the exact, actually, divide in the polity between democracy and authoritarianism. So right now, what we are experiencing actually has much to sort of prove that what we were warning about is going to be true. But I am not actually
but what are those
going
signs?
to stop there, that we told you so, and we were forewarning. So I'm not going to, stay there conveniently. So what I feel now is, at the moment, there is a lot of agonism over both the opposition as well as the government. Because government, for any government, actually, it is always difficult to maintain the same popularity that it had during the election and once it is elected. So that is actually a reality, and the current government is facing that. On the other hand, the pathetic situation is with the opposition, actually. The opposition has not shown its unity, whereas it is high time that opposition should come out and show its unity, because government has enough worries, and which actually the opposition can use for its advantage. So my worry is, at the moment, the opposition is very much silent, and it is on the one hand, it is being sort of silenced by some actions of the government, like arresting some very vocal opposition members like Partly Champika Ranawaka, etc. So on the other hand, there is no unity in the opposition camp. So that is something which is not going to help the democratic system.
Dr. Samarakon, you said that the democratic system, you said that there are some "we told you so" sort of moments. Would you highlight for us what these incidents are that make you feel that democratic space is shrinking?
Well, the first thing that the government has done is to prorogue the parliament. So up until 3rd January, so there is no parliament in Sri Lanka. So all the decisions are made within the cabinet and by the executive. Most of the decisions are related to tax and other financial issues are done in a way which actually is not good for a democracy, because we have a parliament where all the parties meet and they all should discuss about the public money and other issues. So it is not happening at the moment. So one thing the government did is to silence that voice, the legislative voice. So on the other hand, there is enough evidence that so government is not much happy about the way the media has worked and is working. In many cases, like government had conducted several investigations on some journalists, some media institutions. So for what actually? For what reasons? Whether they were sort of campaigning against Mr. Rajapaksa's candidature, or whether they were revealing something in that camp. So we have several doubts that government is not willing to maintain the same media freedom that we have been enjoying, I would say, during the past 4 or 5 years. So,
Deshan?
That's an interesting point made by Dr. Athula. See, what examples in particular have led you to raise this concern, Dr. Athula? You say we feel, but what makes you feel?
Now, when it comes to media freedom, etc., so we have a serious fear about it, right? So, on the one hand, government media is being totally used by the government only, right? So,
Dr. Athula, before you move anything further, I would like to ask you, wasn't that the same thing during the last government, and the government before that, and the government before that, and the government before that?
No.
Wait, just 1 minute. Rasika, Mr. Jagan, do you agree? Do you think that there was...
During the previous government, if you look at the state media, there was an element of the opposition parties, the representatives of opposition parties were given some space in the state media. We can't be satisfied about it.
Right. No, I want to go back to
there was relative progress under the UNP-led government between 2015 and 2019.
So more or less in the democratic structure, I mean, in general, there was a certain improvement, right? That is what we call good governance. So whether we like it or not, many people have a lot of issues with this term. What is good in this government? What was good with that government? So whether that government was democratic at all. So we have a lot of issues with that. But after all, there was some improvement. The democratic structure was being refined in a way. There were a lot of reforms being introduced, right? The 19th Amendment, which has become a sort of thorny factor to the current government. So we see that the president is not willing that the 19th Amendment is continuing, and he seeks more power in the executive organ. So there is this fear that the current government want to reverse some good reforms which are actually implemented by the previous regime. So that doesn't mean that the previous regime was at all democratic. But it was taking some actions, not because that it wanted, but because the external pressure and the pressure that was brought by the civil society, the previous government had to act in a way that it had to improve the democracy.
Dr. Samarkand, the counter-argument to that, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, but the counter-argument to that would be that, the 19th Amendment really prevents the president and the executive, as in the president and his cabinet, from really working together to ensure that aside from going beyond democratic space, when it comes to actually running the country, the counter-argument is that, it prevents the president and the cabinet from getting things done.
So that is how actually democracies function. So why we call a democracy, because in a democracy, the decisions are made not by a single authority, but by several actors. So all those actors have a say in democracy: the executive, the judiciary, the legislature. So major organs of a government balance each other, check each other's power. So that is how a democracy functions. So Sri Lanka in the post-independence period, the best thing happened to it was democracy actually. But I don't say that this democracy is the best democracy that we have got in the world. So our democracy has many problems, many loopholes. So its actors are not democratic at all. So one thing that we do not talk about the nature of the democratic actors in Sri Lanka, whether it is media or whether it is the executive, whether it is the parliamentary membership, So they should be trained actually. They should be properly trained, and they should their role actually should be further shaped in a democratic manner. So that is what is not happening.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Samuel. Rasika, do you really feel that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa and Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa will go as far as seeking the repeal of the 19th Amendment in the event that they win, or even if they don't have a two-thirds majority?
I think, Nadeem, they have made it very clear. President has already stated that 19th Amendment is a hindrance to his activities. When he met a prominent Buddhist monk 2 weeks back, he said 19th Amendment has hampered his work. So it's very clear. They have given very clear signs that they are going to do away with the 19th Amendment. If they,
but is it a clear sign that they're going to do away with it in its entirety, or are they planning on focusing on areas that are problematic?
From what we hear from various parties affiliated with the SLPP, that they are trying to abolish the 19th Amendment in its entirety. That's the sign. That's what I see. But the issue here, I want to add something to Mr. Dr. Samarakone's remarks. The 19th Amendment to the Constitution may have certain weaknesses. For instance, right now, there's no defense minister in the country. According to the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, President can't hold any other ministerial portfolios. So he has to he has to appoint ministers to handle different aspects of the government. But it doesn't say, when the president doesn't appoint a minister to a certain position, what happens? So that remains a gray area in the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. So those things, I think there has to be a discussion and there has to be a dialogue to improve upon the current structure of the 19th Amendment. Even the Constitutional Council, certain high-profile appointments are endorsed by the Constitutional Council, but there's no criteria against which their profiles or their CVs can be measured by the members of the Constitutional Council.
Do you think that this is an area where currently, let's say, the opposition, led by the UNP, or let's say maybe after the general election, either the opposition led by you, do you think that this is an area where the different parties can work together, maybe prevent the total repeal of the 19th Amendment, and instead focus on areas that are problematic?
That's what Mr. Lakshman Kiriyala said, that the UNP, that's why he said the UNP is willing to negotiate with the government to improve upon the current structure of the 19th Amendment to the Constitution. We don't see any harm in that. But throwing away the baby with the bath water is something that we are not okay with. We can't agree with that. But if there are problematic areas, if there are gray areas that need to be clarified, if there are certain amendments that should be done to prevent the current scenario where situations like this, no defense minister is appointed. Now the president president seems to be the de facto defense minister, but no one actually says that clearly, and a state minister has been appointed. So these gray areas can be resolved through a meaningful dialogue. UNP is okay with that. Any political, even the JVP, any political party representing parliament should support that process. But repealing 19th Amendment to the Constitution is severely detrimental to the democratic character of our governance.
We're expecting Mr. Milinda Rajapaksa, Colombo Municipal Councillor of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, to join us. He's not here yet, but his presence would certainly give us an opportunity to get the SLPP's perspective on this. Is it a total repeal of the 19th Amendment that the SLPP is looking for, or is the SLPP willing to work with the other parties in the country to reach a compromise and improve upon the existing structure? Deshan, any quick questions before we go in for a break?
Absolutely, Nadeem. I just want to pop one quick question to Dr. Samarakone. Dr. Samarakone, very quickly, you see there is an issue, there are issues rather with even the 19th Amendment to some degrees that have made governance a bit confusing, to say the least. Even we saw the constitutional crisis in 2018 actually emphasized that as well, with regard to the power clashes between the president and the prime minister. For a while, you were part of the NIO as well, and during that point, like Mr. Jayakudi mentioned, do you think the NIO, the NPP, that they would be open to potentially looking at constitutional reform?
Well, philosophically, I mean, speaking, so we can never have a government or the constitution without confusions. If you look at the major democracies in the world, like USA, UK, so USA constitution is very short, and UK has a very unwritten constitution. But those countries function properly, and now if you look at the way Mr. Trump is being impeached, it's a very, very confusing process. Right now, it is at the Senate level, and it's a Senate inquiry, which is very long trial actually, right, involving judges and Senate members. But in our country, we have a very clearly written, rigid constitution. Even with that, we are not doing well. So confusion is a very good thing, actually. Confusion is not a very bad thing. Confusion should be there always. We will always have confusions, right? Rulers will always complain, especially rulers like Rajapaksas, they will always complain. We want more power, more power. And what they have done with more power after all. So that is the question you guys should be asking them, right? In this country, all the medias, if it is under the regime which is governed in the country, so they will be happy. The UNP or the JVP or the Gotabe, so they will be happy to take control of the entire media, entire parliament. So is that the way the democracy should be functioning? I don't think so. As a political scientist or a student of politics, I would say these confusions, these constitutional crises are all the more important to improve democracy. So democracy is always about waging through confusions, through problems. So it is politics which actually look at the humane side of the political actors. If the political actors can't remain humane, and they become violent and kill each other and go to revenge, so that is where the problem is. So problem is always subjective, as well as there is something to do with the structure. So we need to improve the structure, as well as we need to appoint good actors, good people into power. So we need better democrats in the system. So problem is today 94 members have failed O-levels, and several members have not sat even A-level. So, and only very few members know the meaning of democracy.
You have to take responsibilities for these facts. Do you wish to cite a source?
Yeah, I think these are known things, right?
Yeah, I think there was a confusion about that particular number, because 94, there was no, I mean, it came up.
Also, I cite Ranjan Ramanaya.
Okay.
So I don't know. So
Right, but
I'm sorry that I have to cite only him.
Just give me 30 seconds, Desha. So what he said, I mean, democracy, any functional government is a work in progress. So we should be okay with that process. I think that respect, more than the word confusion, I would like to add the word work in progress.
Work in progress.
So, so work in progress is part of a functional democracy. But all of us should embark on it in a meaningful manner, not with an objective, with a collateral agenda to further our, to further our own agenda. That's the nature of. I think the interaction that we would like to have.
Absolutely. Nadeem, just before I pass it on to you, Dr. Samarakon, the NPP that you knew,
yes,
would they be open to constitutional reform? Yes or no? Very quickly.
I think NPP is very much a democratic actor. Right. So I always believe that it will support, I don't know the current status, but it will support any democratic reform in this country, because it was very much there when the 19th amendment was brought in. So it supported, the JVP supported it, and all the parties supported it after all, right? Who opposed it actually?
FSP.
With one?
Frontline Socialist Party.
Only few members, right?
One member.
One member, right.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. We'll go in for a short commercial break on that note. We're hoping to be joined by Mr. Milinda Rajapaksa, Colombo Municipal Councillor for the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna. We've had an interesting discussion around the problems within the different political camps, but also on areas in which maybe they could find common ground. We spoke specifically about the 19th Amendment as well, and opportunities for the different parties to work together to improve upon the existing framework instead of a total repeal. Or as Rasika termed it, throwing the baby out of the bathwater. We don't know whether this is the stance of the SLPP. We're hoping to find that out from Mr. Milinda Rajapaksa when he does join us. When we come back, though, we'd also be talking about another controversial issue and potentially finding common ground on that, the Millennium Challenge Sri Lanka Compact. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We're in discussion with two political activists from two different mainstream sort of political camps regarding the divisive political culture in the country and areas in which we can find common ground for the different parties to work on. We're in conversation with Rasika Jayakodi, UMP political activist and political commentator. We're also in conversation with Dr. Atula Samarakon of the Open University of Sri Lanka and convener of the Puravasi Handa organization, or Voice of the People organization. We're also joined by, on this side, by Deshan Gonawala, my very able colleague, and we are also awaiting the arrival still of Mr. Milinda Rajapaksa, SLPP Colombo Municipal Councillor. We hope he'll join us to provide some insight into the government's side of the story. When we left off, we were talking about democratic spaces like the various reforms that were introduced through the 19th Amendment and the importance of reforming the 19th Amendment rather than repealing it in its totality. Rasika, I also said that we'd focus a little bit on the Millennium Challenge Compact Agreement. Now, your camp, let's say, or a section of your camp were proponents of the Sri Lanka Compact offered by the grant from the Millennium Challenge Corporation. And we seem to be seeing some kind of backtracking from certain sections within the government, the current government, on their stance on the Sri Lanka Compact, which they were completely against. How do you see the MCC
I think
moving
that demonstrates
forward?
nothing but their political opportunism, because before the election, when the cabinet passed, the cabinet agreed to sign the MCC agreement. There's a lot of, they created a lot of fear in society. As this will divide the country and people will have to obtain visa to visit Anuradhapura, and there was a lot of disinformation and misinformation carried out by the SLPP-led camp. They were directly involved in that. And they lobbied, there's a very strong lobby against the MCC agreement, especially, with Buddhist monks, and the entire campaign was orchestrated by the SLPP, and even within the SLPP, the ultra-nationalist elements, they were very much active against the initiative. Now, in a very interesting turn of events, within just a few weeks into the appointment of the new government, Mr. Udaya Gammampila went on record saying 70% of the MCC pact was positive for Sri Lanka. So they only had a problem about 30% of the agreement. I mean, this shows their political opportunism and the way they hoodwinked the public just before the election. So I think, again, it's up to the public to hold them accountable, to question them. Why are they backtracking now? So they said MCC was detrimental to the country before the election, but after the election, they are trying to now backtrack, and they are trying to get this USD 480 million grant, which I find is very amusing.
Dr. Samarakon, you have been vocal on overseas or bilateral agreements that Sri Lanka has entered into in the past. I'm not sure of your exact stance on the MCC, but you called the Singapore-Sri Lanka FTA anti-Sri Lankan, for example. With the MCC moving forward, do you see any common ground that the different political actors can arrive at to take it forward?
Yeah.
Given that that at least a section of the SLPP seems to favor.
Yeah, actually, as Rasika very clearly told it, the government was very much sort of, my goodness, that our country is, the government is, that the current government actually started the campaign against MCC when it contested the election, right? So it was going to be the end of the world, like, ne? So, but now its stance has changed, right? So we don't know why. But whenever an international agreement of this nature is negotiated, so it has to be negotiated properly, and opportunities and threats need to be identified by the government, because we have our national interest which should be given priority. So USA will never compromise with its national interest, whereas a small state like Sri Lanka, because when it comes to the capacity of our country, its power is very less, and it's very obvious that this agreement is being signed between two asymmetrical powers. One is a superpower and one is no power, right? It's a very minor, minute power in the global arena today. So under the existing global conditions, so there are a lot of actually doubts and a lot of gray areas, as Rasika also told, when we take up signing these sort of agreements, because now
So, Dr.
if you look at the power rivalry on the one hand in the Indian Ocean and the US's Asia-Pacific strategy. So
that's a fair call,
yeah.
that you have to consider the global sort of geopolitical realities
Of course,
when you're entering into various international agreements. But when these concerns were raised, the government at the time made the agreement public. Upon it being made public, do you feel that those concerns were addressed, or even with the agreement being public, is it still grey?
Well, one thing which is clear, whether it is the UNP or the SLPP, or whichever the party is in power, actually Sri Lanka is not in a position to completely reject a proposal, an agreement put forward by one of the major trading partners, major powers of the world, right? That is the USA. So USA is one of our very closest, I wouldn't say allies, but it affects much of us, much when it comes to our foreign policy. So foreign policy regionally and internationally, there is a bigger role that the US plays when it comes to the small countries like ours. So in South Asian context, we know India is clearly aligned with the USA, and we know this Indo-US axis, right? So it is sort of working against the Chinese encroachment into South Asia. So we know that China has encroached, and it has extended much of its policies to Sri Lanka, right? So Sri Lanka has provided much space for China's activities here. So when it comes to Southern Harbour and Port City and many other projects, and China heavily involves in our politics, not politics, but basically in economics, right? And trade. So we benefit, as well as China also benefits from the space that Sri Lanka provides to it, right? So there is clearly a sort of competition when it comes to the power in the region. So in the regional sphere, so the struggle for the primacy is the central issue. So in that case, this is actually MCC is testing our foreign policy, right? So whether we can remain non-aligned forever, or whether we can sort of balance between China and USA.
Thank
right?
you, Dr. Sam. Very quickly, Rasika, do you agree with the contentions raised by
Nadeem, in this day and age, I don't think countries come up with linear foreign policies. I mean, there are no hard and fast rules. For instance, US, India, China, Russia, Japan, all these countries have overlapping interests. On some matters, they will work together. On some matters, they will fight each other. So it's a very convoluted world order. So in this case, Sri Lanka needs to put its interest, the country's interest, national interest first, and look at it from a Sri Lanka first foreign policy perspective. How we can manage this new world order? How we can manage these overlapping interests? How we can make sure that our national interests are served? We have to resort to that kind of thinking when analyzing the pros and cons of the MCC Pact. So in that context, I can tell you, I went through the agreement and it was made public. It has now everyone can. Finance Ministry made it available to everyone before the election. It should have been done much earlier, so that then there would have been enough time and space for a meaningful dialogue on that. But from what I understand, the MCC Pact doesn't have any negative or detrimental content. All we have to do is to manage these overlapping interests of superpowers and handle our foreign policy.
Deshan?
Mr. Jagodi, that's a very interesting point that you made about the fact that the MCC doesn't really have anything bad. Do you think the former government mishandled the PR when it came to the MCC? Do you think that was one of the reasons that it created so much confusion among people?
Of course, because the agreement should have been made public much earlier, as I pointed out, not at the last moment. And the timing of the cabinet passing the MCC was also detrimental, because that happened just 2 weeks before the election. So the other side, the opposition at the time, went to town with it.
And I think also, Mr. Jayakodi, there was conflicting views within the camp as well. At the time, if I'm not mistaken, weren't there, with regard to the MCC, certain factions?
With regard to the MCC agreement, I don't think there are...
Certain factions hinting a certain way and saying we're not going to sign anything that is detrimental to the country, Is it that...
I think what Deshan is saying is that essentially, even within your own party, you had actors who were singing from different hymn sheets.
Yeah, so I think no one had seen the agreement at that point. It was made public at the last stage, and that was a mistake. That should have been done much earlier. So then, after the agreement was made public, I think no one came up with any kind of meaningful, opposition to the. I didn't come across anything.
Mr. Jayakodi, before I go to Dr. Samarkon, according to your knowledge, I could be wrong here. You said nobody had seen this agreement. According to your knowledge, as per your knowledge, was the UNP parliamentary group given enough time to prepare in terms of the MCC agreement and its contents? Because you saw even at debates, even on stage, they seem to lack content, they seem to lack facts to actually speak about the agreement.
I think the ideal scenario is, before signing or during the negotiation process, there should have been a workshop or a conference for the parliamentary group, where the finance minister or the officials handling the process should make presentations to the parliamentary group. So when they ask questions during public platforms, they have enough material.
And as far as you know, this didn't happen?
That didn't happen. I think what happened is that the agreement was made public at the height of the controversy, and I think at that point was too late.
Right.
Rasika, the UNP's presidential candidate Sajid Premdas has said that if President Gotabaya Rajapaksa wants to abolish the MCC Sri Lanka Compact, that he will happily give him a 2/3 majority in Parliament in order to do away with it. It seems that you're at odds with Mr. Premdas on this.
Not really, Nadim, because right now the public, whatever said and done, we have to accept the outcome of the election. The public overwhelmingly supported, they voted in favor of Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who thrived on anti-MCC propaganda. So that was the mandate. So the people's mandate is to do away with this. That's how I understand this, because they were thriving on anti-MCC propaganda.
So Mr. Premdas wasn't being sarcastic then.
They were given a mandate by the public. That means the country, the public at large, the majority of our voters, voting population, did not want the government to proceed with the MCC Pact, whether it's good or bad. I mean, we have to respect the mandate. So I think Mr. Premadasa must be indicating that all of us should respect the mandate and support the outcome of the election. So I don't see any conflict with that.
There seems to be a small problem. I mean, in representative democracies, people elect their representatives to lead them. If the people are being misinformed by those representatives, then I think your argument of it being whether it's good or bad, we have to do away with it.
The agreement was made public before the election, like I think 2 weeks before the election, no 1.5 weeks before the election, 2 weeks before the election, agreement was made public. So the election took place while the agreement, the content of the agreement was in the public domain. But still, people chose to vote against the MCC Pact. So the matter ends there.
But I'm sure that for the public, there were way more issues than just the MCC Pact.
Yes,
I mean, people weren't. It wasn't a single issue.
If you analyze the airtime they used, to criticize MCC, it was one of the major slogans against the UNP that we are trying to sell the country to through the MCC Pact. So people voted against it. So what Mr. Premadasa is saying is that if they are trying to abolish or to withdraw from the process, the UNP doesn't have any problem with that because they are now in the government. They have to make a call. But what we are not okay with is that when they were in the opposition, they were criticizing this heavily. The moment they come,
are you saying that if the SLPP by some happenstance, by some chance, decides to go ahead with the MCC Sri Lanka Compact,
they have to.
Will the UNP then stand against such a move?
No, I mean more than the UNP, they have to negotiate that with the people who voted for them. That's the hardest part. They have to sell their decision. They have to market their decision to the public who voted for them. That's the first battle. The UNP can then decide how we want to. That's a secondary matter because we are in the opposition.
Yeah. Very quickly, Dr. Samarakoon, if the SLPP-led, if President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's government decides to move ahead with the MCC Sri Lanka Compact, what will be the role of organizations like yours, the Purasi Handa organization?
Well, actually, we are not there always to argue that all sort of international agreements are detrimental to our country, its foreign policy, etc. So what we need to be serious about the implications on it, right? So right now, Mr. Rasika tells that there will be positive implications, right? It will work for our good, right? Common good. After all sort of politics agreements should be for the common good of the nation, right? So that is where we are actually. If we are suspicious about something, so we have to very clearly state that suspicion, right? So why actually MCC? So we have to ask this question: why MCC, and for what reasons? At this context, right? So these questions needs to be answered properly, I think. So why MCC and who proposed it? Whether it is our plan or whether it is the plan of a global power. So we have to very clearly read the global conditions that we experience at the moment, right? The global capitalist system is being sort of restructured, right? It's been restructured, and the US and its financial agencies are working on it. And there is also, on the other hand, severe sort of declining when it comes to the economic influence of the US-led powers in the world. Basically, the Western camp is facing a relative decline when it comes to the international global.
That's true.
Power,
that's true. Again, we look at like the global, but we're talking with the specifics of the MCC.
So the government was elected very clearly on an anti-MCC platform, right?
Okay.
Rasika agrees, right? So we saw that.
So your position is also that
Mr.
even if it's good, the
Gotabaya
government
Rajapaksa's
should sign it.
Which actually analyze MCC from a very much an ultra-nationalist perspective. So I am not analyzing the MCC in that way. So I am seeing this as a sort of another structural adjustment which actually expands the existing capitalist system in the world, right? So whether we are opposing capitalism or not is a problem with the left. So I am not going to support that camp. But I am sort of trying to look at what actually the MCC is going to do to our ordinary people. So they are natural resources, basically the land, right? So right now we have a Land Reforms Act which actually prevents the ordinary people, the poor farmers, selling their land, right? And actually the land basically remains the property of the state today, right? So that is the structural adjustment proposed by the MCC. So after this agreement is being implemented, right? So people will be able to sell their land. So the conditions will be created by capitalism again that the people will feel that they don't have a use of these lands. Basically, in the people in the dry zone and other areas, already they feel that their paddy lands and other existing lands are not actually giving them sort of enough for a living. So in that case, so there is much space for capitalism to expand into the land sector, the natural resources, right?
Dr. Samuel, I'm sure it's not what you mean, but you're not suggesting that people keep the land and not make a living.
I'm not suggesting anything, but as a government which is responsible for the common good and the future of a country, so we also have to think not at the moment, at the current moment only, we have to look at the future as well. So future of a country means how much natural resources it can actually have and how its strategic assets are sort of preserved for the future people. Right?
Thank you, Dr. Samuel. Rasika, very quickly.
We shouldn't complicate it too much, because in the end, this is a grant of USD 480 million, which will be utilized for two main projects. One is the land registration program, and the other is the traffic management program. So this money, 480 million USD, will be channeled into these two projects. So if the government says that it doesn't want money from the US to proceed with these two programs, we are okay with it. We don't have to fight on behalf of the US. That is the US's battle or someone else's battle. We don't have a problem with that. But what we say is that these two important projects, these two important programs, development aspects, has to be pursued, has to be carried out. So if the government doesn't want money from the US and if they have their own money, or if they raise money through different other sources, it's not our problem. So what we are saying is that the government has to, we don't have to fight the US's battles. I mean, that's not how it works.
So, Najib, one thing is very clear that we don't have money at all, right?
Yeah.
So after all, all the governments complain that the treasury is empty. Right after being elected, the Prime Minister was telling we got an empty treasury, right? And the previous government also told the same. So we actually have enough sort of reasons to sign this agreement, not to actually reject it. Right. So as a government which doesn't have money actually to run its day-to-day activities even,
right.
So it is sort of forced to sign this sort of agreement.
Right, Nadim.
Very quickly, one question.
One question before I hand it back to you. Citizen Samarakon and Citizen Jayakodi, both of you are advocates for this particular agreement. You've been on this program before the election advocating for it as well. Assuming the SLPP changes its stance and says, you know what, we've analyzed it, we are okay with it, will Citizen Jayakodi put his hand up and say, yeah, we don't mind, it's good for the country?
Yes.
Will Citizen Samarakon say, yes, it's good for the country, we don't mind? Or will Citizen Jayakodi say, you know what, this is what they said, they made it look bad, so I'm against it because of the way they did it.
My stance is very clear.
Yeah.
Offer a public apology for hoodwinking the public with anti-MCC propaganda before the election, and then say, yes, we changed our stance, but they have to apologize to the public if that is the case.
Right.
Because that means they have hoodwinked the public knowingly or otherwise.
If the SLPP-led our SLPP-led government
apologizes to the public,
right.
That's the first thing, because they hoodwink the public.
But
if that is the case.
You will not be back on this program criticizing the agreement. You will be criticizing the ethics behind.
Of course, if they apologize, I mean, anyone can make mistakes.
If they don't
apologize, they have to apologize.
If they don't apologize, you wouldn't criticize the agreement.
Then I would point out the opportunism. I would, okay, as I told you earlier, Deshan, it's a 480 million USD money that will go into two projects. So if the government doesn't want to get that money from the US, we are perfectly okay with that, given that they pursue these development programs.
Right.
So again, it's the government's problem to figure out where they get money from.
Right.
It's not up because we are in the opposition. But if they now, before the election they took a serious, heavy anti-MCC stance, and if they are backtracking on that at this point, they have to explain to the public why they did that. And if the explanation
Thank
is
you,
good
Rasika.
enough,
I'll stop you there. We have to go in for a
Nadim, but before you go in,
short
we
commercial
have to
break.
get a yes or no?
You can get your question immediate as soon as we get back. We're talking about the MCC grant. Something for our viewers to think about as well. Nepal, which is actually led by a communist party, Maoist, or at least inspired by Maoist communist party, did sign an MCC compact not too long ago. It was to do with increasing electrification and lowering public transportation costs. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to the program. When we left off, we were talking about development, specifically what the different party stances on the MCC Sri Lanka Compact are. Unfortunately, we don't know what the SLPP's current stance is. We were hoping that Mr. Milinda Rajapaksa, Colombo Municipal Councillor, would explain that to us, but unfortunately he has been unable to join us, and we have as yet been unsuccessful in our attempts to contact him. We hope that he is well, because he's not usually one to evade media engagements. Deshan, before we move on to other topics, I'll quickly let you get a response from Rasika and Dr. Samarakon to your final question in the last round.
Absolutely, Dr. Mr. Jayakodi, I don't think you answered the last question.
No, I think my stance is very clear, Deshan.
Yeah.
The content of the agreement
Remains the same?
Remains the same. So I don't have any problem with the content of the agreement.
Right. And you wouldn't, in the case this content stays the same and the government is for it?
Yes, but I won't be okay if they pursue it without a public apology, so that because for hoodwinking, deceiving the public before the election.
Ethically, fair enough. I'm not disagreeing, but I'm asking you, you won't be on this program criticizing the agreement at that point.
Yeah, at that point I'll be criticizing the political opportunism.
Right.
That's another
fair
issue.
Enough. Fair enough.
And Dr.
Samarakon, what do you think? Dr. Samarakon, Citizen Samarakon, will he criticize this government or oppose the agreement in the case the current government decides to pursue it?
Yeah, well,
yes or no?
Yeah, as a citizen, I always take the side of country, actually.
Right.
So in that case, I am very much cautious about this agreement, and I always advocate that we need to be careful in signing this sort of agreements, because they are going to change the entire sort of economic structure of the country after all, right? So this agreement is going to affect our land. So land is a basic right of the people, and if the people, I'm not going to say that people are going to lose their land, but if this agreement after all makes changes to the existing land reform, so that is
your fear is that people will sell the agricultural land, and that there will be no...
Of course, actually that is a global process at the moment, because globally the agriculture, now in Sri Lanka, a lot of issues are there with agriculture. Our agriculture is not actually profiting, right? So our farmers are at a loss. So it is good for us to import rice from India than cultivating it here. So our lands are not properly utilized, and there are a lot of sort of uncultivated...
so that actually brings us to the next sort of segment of our discussion, which is on the economic reforms that President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has been talking about with regard to agriculture, and even the various, let's say, concessions or reforms economically that he was proposing through his manifesto. Do either of you see common ground where your parties or your groups can work with the government, find common ground, maybe compromise, and are there any areas that you can push forward for the betterment of the country?
Yeah. Actually, when it comes to Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, so it seems that he wants to do something, right, to the economy and to change the political system, etc. It seems that he has a sort of political will to make changes into several areas. But I always doubt doubt the sort of platform actually he's right now on. Right, his power is based on a sort of ultra nationalist platform, which actually is not sort of advocating the right type of proposals that Mr. Rajapaksa has in his mind, right? So when it comes to economic reforms, so Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa has sort of Mahathir Mohamad in his mind, right? So if we analyze and read what Mahathir Mohamad did to Malaysia and how he could do all sort of changes, actually it was through a very much undemocratic sort of and authoritarian power only that Mahathir Mohamad could implement many of the programs which actually created current Malaysia. But whether Sri Lanka is in a position to go sort of in that direction and use authoritarianism, not democracy, to implement many of the economic reforms is seriously doubtful, because ours is a system which is very much used to this democracy actually. We are absorbed in democracy and our people are not much used to sort of authoritarian handling of power and economics. So Gotabaya Rajapaksa's economic agenda at the moment points to a very much an authoritarian direction, right? So whereas even his party and all other parties would not sort of approve or provide support to implement such a program. So I can sort of express my doubts only, right? So I don't know whether Mr. Rajapaksa is able to sort of implement policies through a very much democratic direction. So that is very much up to him. But to develop the country in the way that Mr. Rajapaksa envisions is very much difficult, because we remain highly polarized polity when it comes to making democratic opinions. We are very powerful. So we have equally divided two camps. One has got 69 lakhs of votes and the other nearly got 60 lakhs of votes. So we are a sort of divided polity where we have a very vibrant democracy at the moment, right? This democracy has to be refined, but in a way it is very vibrant. So that means no party can operate on its, purely on its policy line.
Thank you,
without
Dr.
the cooperation of the other
Rasika,
party.
very quickly, do you see any areas where you all can find common ground with President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's administration?
The issue right now is that we are seeing the government's economic program in parts. We don't see the full program. For instance, the new government announced a series of tax reforms. So now it is clear that these reforms will revisions will result in a decrease of government revenue at least by over 250 billion rupees. So Fitch Ratings recently said this will amount to probably amount to 2% of our GDP in the absence of the necessary corrective measures. So how is the government planning to bridge this gap? Remains a mystery. So that's the problem. They are not saying, are they widening the tax base, or are they pursuing any other avenues of avenues to generate more revenue? These things remain unclear. At the same time, on the surface, it looks like the government is trying to stimulate the economy. But stimulating the economy through tax reforms, only through tax reforms, it's not practical. There has to be several other things that should fall into place to stimulate the economy. So in that respect, what we see right now is that the government is pursuing some plan, but it likes to keep the citizens or the opposition in the dark about how they are going to achieve their targets. So it's not very clear as to how they are going to go about it. But I think on a broader scale, we believe that Sri Lanka should move in the direction of a knowledge economy that focuses heavily on high value production. For instance, our IT sector generates export revenue of about $1 billion USD that can be increased without much effort, with the right investments, the right kind of decisions.
Mr. Jakodi, see, it's a very interesting point, and I want to speak to you particularly about the economy, which is arguably in a post-war era, which is arguably the most decisive factor when it comes to economics, when it comes to politics as well. You see, when you speak about the economic agenda, and you particularly said a knowledge-based economy, over the last 5 years, that is from 2019 to 2015, January 8th, during the course of a UNP-led government, we didn't see enough done, especially for the IT sector, I would arguably say so. Because I'm sure you would agree with me in saying the facility over there in Borella, which is an innovation hub today, Trace Expert City, was a concept by the current president back when he was the Secretary of Defense. Then the Mahinda Rajapaksa government carried out the Mahindodaya program. You saw how immediately after the government was overturned, they had renamed it Vidyodaya. And then, the project wasn't done as aggressively, it did not continue as aggressively as it did previously. And in the same sense, I think the only benefit that was offered was the tax deduction for services that are e-related or internet-related or anything to do with technology. But how is it that you can expect the people now to have faith in the United National Party-led alliances input into what the economy should be in terms of a knowledge hub, when over the course of the 4.5 years that they were in power, their investment into the knowledge-based industry wasn't as great as it should have been? I think probably arguably the biggest investment, if I'm not mistaken, was the potential opportunity to have tabs being given to students. Apart from that, we didn't see much, did we?
Yeah, the issue with the previous UNP-led government, Deshal, was that it was in a firefighting mode. There was no comprehensive national plan on the digital front. That was a problem. At the same time, you said there are certain things that happened. At the same time, they invested in the Homagama IT city, and that was a very important measure in terms of infrastructure. So there were good and bad elements in the program, but the issue was that we didn't have a national plan. For instance, when it comes to tourism, we have a tourism 3-year strategic plan. So there are 145 action items which will be pursued by any administration that governs the tourism sector until 2020.
As a citizen and as a former journalist, and being a journalist gives you the opportunity, I'm sure you're aware more than I am, of analyzing the broader picture. And like you were saying, knowledge-based economy, it's a big part of where we want to head moving forward, because it's somewhere we can potentially look at a competitive advantage, especially when manufacturing is not really something we can do to the scale of China or India. Which is why I want to ask you, the president, I think this week, just last week, appointed a set of professionals, IT sector professionals. I think the likes of Mano Sekaramma in there, I think Sanjeev Veeravarna from WSO2, just people who are called powerhouses in the IT sector appointed. Where do you see this kind of move taking the country?
I see that as a very positive move, and I think it's a welcome sign. That means President has a genuine interest to work towards empowering the IT sector. At the same time, there are certain things that he has to take into consideration. For instance, in 2018, the Ministry of Development Strategies and International Trade came up with a national innovation plan, like 4-year plan, from 2018 to 2022, which was passed by the cabinet. And but the thing is, the previous government couldn't finalize the matter. But the draft is still there; it's still in the public domain. So if the current president is serious about this, I think he should pursue that and implement the national 4-year plan, which will make sure that there's stability in the IT sector, and that will be a decisive roadmap to transform Sri Lanka into a knowledge-based economy.
One last thing with relation to the IT sector, in particular in this country, since we brought it up. The ICTA has been an agency within the government that plays a massive role in the IT operations of the government as a whole. You see, they are very often behind websites, they are very often behind applications developed for the purpose of government. But recently, it was revealed to us that the ICTA now no longer operates even government projects without a fee. What has led to this breakdown of communication, you think? Do you think it was because of a political issue between having, UPFF/UNP government, or do you think it was neglect?
Yeah, I think the issue with the previous government is that there were several centers of power.
Yeah.
So because of that, no one had absolute control and there was no top-down system. So that led to various complications, various confusions and contradictions.
Because I'm sure you would agree with me that if you go to a government website today, I haven't checked it today, but over, let's say, up until the 16th of November at least, websites aren't updated. They are far from user-friendly. It's hard for you to download any information. Even if you download an application, very often it's not the size you require to fill it. So there's a serious lack of interest in making people's lives easier through information communication.
We're running short on time, so I'll ask you to give some.
Yeah, so in that case, I completely agree with you, and that was the issue, and that's something that our government, the UNP-led government, couldn't pursue, couldn't effectively handle during our administration. But I think it's something we have to agree. We have to agree with. We see the results.
Yeah.
Now, recently, 2 days ago, the Census and Statistics Department came up with the latest statistics. The digital literacy of Sri Lanka stands at 42%, and the computer literacy is less than 30% in most cases, in most areas. So this is a very alarming situation, and we need to find effective solutions, irrespective of political affiliations, to empower the IT sector. And in that case, I think we can't have any divisions over that.
A question for Dr. Samarkon Desan?
Absolutely, Dr. Samarkon. Just before we wrap up, I think, Nadeem, before I offer you the opportunity to wrap up the show, I want to ask you one last question. This show, you've been on this show representing some of the ideologies of the left when it comes to politics previously. Those opinions have evolved, and that is the nature of politics, that's the nature of human beings, so that's fine. But I want to ask you this. Has the JVP, you think, kind of pull themselves, kind of trip themselves over by the stance they have taken over the last 4.5 years? And very quickly, do you think contesting the general election, they will be able to potentially grow at least one seat from where they stand right now? Or do you think they will be resigned to the fate they were in 2015, or even a little bit worse?
Deshan, actually, I'm not in a position to analyze the current strategy of the JVP, but I would like to say that in the upcoming election, we need a sort of all the parties in the opposition, I think, should be following a common strategy about democracy of the country, because that is what is being threatened at the moment, right? If we carefully analyze all sort of economic policies, all sort of political reforms that the government is going to bring, introduce in future, so they all will affect the current status of the democracy. So that is my worry, actually. My worry is no longer about the left or the right, but how this common democratic public sphere is maintained and can be preserved for future. So we need, as Hannah Arendt, the 20th century's most vibrant political philosopher, tells us, despite all our ideological and other political differences, we should all be able to discuss negotiate our differences. Because after all, we all talk about the state, right? The state is is more important than the party. State is more important than a person, right? State is more important than our ideology. So after all, we all have to, right, preserve the democratic character of the state. So this is a very serious issue at the moment, because whenever a nationalist government is in power, it will take actions to change the character of the democracy. Now, if you look at India, what at the moment the Modi government is doing, so the country, India is burning at the moment, right? So Modi government has won at the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, but as a nation which is capable of arguing, so India is called an argumentative nation, right? So it is not easy to handle the issues in that country because there are many voices, multiracial, right? Multicultural, multi-religious nation like India is now vehemently trying to preserve its democratic character. It's against changing the structure of the constitution, which is actually built upon the ideals set by Nehru, Gandhi, the Ambedkars, and all these futuristic leaders. So right now, more or less, Sri Lanka is also facing the same issue, I would say, right? When it comes to economic reforms, when it comes to democratic reforms, what we face today is a serious threat is going to come on the democratic system, right? So that is my worry. So I'm not worried about MCC or any other agreement as long as they are going to help the country, help the nation. If they are progressive, let the government implement them, right? If they are not progressive, let us protest that, right? So this is how the democracy should function, the progress. So our worry should be always be about democracy, nothing else, right?
Thank you very much, Dr. Samrakon. Thank you very much also to Rasika Jayakuri. Dr. Samrakon, of course, was saying that the most important thing at present is to preserve the democratic nature of our state. Rasika echoed similar sentiments, and with the 19th Amendment, he said we should be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater. We are more than willing to negotiate with the current administration and reach compromises on preserving positive aspects of the 19th Amendment while working on problematic areas. And also on the MCC agreement, I think, Rasika, you said that if the government first apologizes and then proceeds to implement it, that you would support such a measure. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also to Deshan, my very able colleague. Some very insightful questions coming from Deshan's end as well. Unfortunately, to a lot of the questions that we were hoping to pose to the spokesperson for the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, we were unable to do that today because Minindra Rajapaksa, for some reason, was unable to join us. We've been unable to contact him, or our attempts to contact him have been unsuccessful. He has been on the program on many previous occasions, and he's not one to usually shy away from the media. So his absence is quite unusual. We hope that he is well. On that note, we'll wrap up today's program. Thank you again to Rasika and Dr. Samrakon. Thank you also to Deshan. Is the democratic nature of our country at stake? Is it under threat? Do you envision a threat in the future? What are your thoughts on the economic reforms or the economic agenda that is being followed at present? And on the political side of things, what are your thoughts on the strife within the UNP, the lack of unity, as Dr. Samrakon put it, in the opposition? Is there a way forward for our country? We'd love to hear from our viewers as well. Have a very Merry Christmas and a very Happy New Year as well. Good night and good luck.